Hey Savvy Social Workers, this presentation is going to be on research design, methods, and program evaluation. A lot of you have asked me to specifically do a little bit more on this topic in addition to my other video on community macro where I did include some information on this. So if you have not checked that video out, please go and check that video out. But of course, y'all asked, I try my best to deliver. So I am going to be giving you information on this topic. If you would like a more detailed version of this information, you can find it inside of my online prep course where it goes into further detail on these topics. So let's begin with research design. The function of a research design is to ensure that the evidence or data collected enables the research questions to be answered. Research design is different from the method by which data are collected. So basically, you have a research design and you also have methods by which the data is collected for the research. Research design is a blueprint with the research problem determining the type of design that's going to be used. So research design will do this list of things. It will identify the research problem clearly and justify its selection. It will review previously published literature associated with the problem area. It will clearly and explicitly specify hypotheses central to the problem selected. It will effectively describe the data that will be necessary for an adequate test of the hypothesis and explain how such data will be obtained. And it will describe the methods of analysis that will be applied to the data in determining whether or not the hypotheses are true or false. So these are all the reasons why we do research, why we pick a specific research design. Now for these slides, if you need to pause and take notes or whatever you need to do, I would advise you do this because now we are getting into the important things that you can see on the exam of what you need to know in the areas of research, beginning with the types of research. So first of all, we need to know what internal validity and external validity is, okay? So we will discuss this a little bit further on, but just getting started, just know the difference between the two. Internal validity addresses the extent to which causal inferences can be made about the intervention and the targeted behavior, which I will simplify as we go on. And external validity addresses how generalizable those inferences are to the general population. Now, the types of research. We have pre-experimental, which contain intervention groups only, and they lack comparison and control groups, making them the weakest. So a pre-experimental type of research is going to be the weakest because it doesn't have a comparison or a control group. Then we have an experimental type of research, or you can call it a true experimental type of research. This is the most rigorous and it is the most accurate because it does have control and comparison groups. Then there's a quasi-experimental type of research. It uses intervention and comparison groups, but assignment to the groups is non-random. So with quasi-experimental, these are non-random, and we're going to go into these a little bit more in detail, but this is just the preliminary basics of each type of research. Then we have single subject research. This aims to determine whether an intervention has an intended impact on a client or on many clients who form a group, so that can be a community, an agency, or whatever the case may be. The most common single subject research is pre and post test or a single case study. Single subject research is ideal for studying the behavior change of a client exhibits as a result of some treatment. So if you are doing DBT with the client, you can do single subject research to see if it has implemented any type of behavior changes within this client. So now we're going to break them each down so that you can get a visual and more understanding of each type of research design. So we have the pre-experimental. Like I said, this is the weakest. So this design includes one or more than one experimental group to be observed against certain treatments. It is the simplest form of research, which is why it's the weakest, design that follows the basic steps in experiments. The pre-experimental design does not have a comparison group. So as you can see from the image, you just have two experimental groups that are being observed against certain treatments. Okay, these type of designs include a case study design, a one group pre-test or post-test design, or a static group comparison design, which is a cross-sectional study. So just think about when it's pre-experimental, it is just basically groups against whatever the treatment is. Nothing that is being compared against or anything like that. Now, in true experimental, of course, or just experimental design research, it relies on statistical analysis to prove or disprove a researcher's hypothesis. It is one of the most accurate forms of research because it provides specific scientific evidence, which is why they call it true experimental. So, this is where you're going to have the experimental groups and you're also going to have a control group. So, the first group, let's just say, is going to receive a high dosage of, medication or whatever the intervention is. The second group is going to receive a low dosage, and then you're going to have a third group, which is the control group, which is going to receive a placebo, such as a sugar pill or something like that. So you're going to have each group that is going to be receiving something different, and the control group is going to receive a placebo. After administering the drug for a period of time, if the condition of the experimental group subjects improves significantly more than the control group subjects, then we can say that the drug is effective. We can also compare the conditions from group 1 and group 2, the high and low dosage experimental groups, to determine if the high dose is more effective than the low dose. So we compare the two groups against each other, as well as comparing them against the control group, which received the placebo. So in a true experiment, a researcher must satisfy three factors. Number one, there is a control group that is not subjected to changes, and an experimental group that will experience change variables. So you have to have at least one group and a control group for a true experimental. Second, a variable that can be manipulated by the researcher. So this type of research design has to have a variable that can be manipulated. So like in this case, the variable being manipulated is the dosage. Okay, one gets high dose, one gets low dose, one gets placebo. So you can manipulate that variable. Okay, and then number three, it has to have random distribution of its variables. So it has to have random assignment, which of course is different from quasi, which we will get into in a minute, because that one does not have random assignment. Now into the quasi-experimental. Quasi-experimental designs are almost identical to true experimental designs, but they're lacking one key ingredient, which is what I said, the random assignment. Quasi-experimental designs are therefore inferior to true experimental designs in interval validity. So you have a treatment group and you have a control group, just like in the experimental, the true experimental, but there's no random assignment. Quasi always makes use of the pre-test, post-test model of result comparison. Okay, so in this type of experiment, group one, the one entire class section or one organization is used. And then in group two, which is the control group, another section of that same class or a different organization in the same industry is used. So there's nothing random about this. You are using the same class, just a different section in the control group. Okay, it is generally preferable to avoid quasi-experimental designs to the greatest extent possible. This is why, because of the lack of random assignment. In this research design, an independent variable is manipulated, but the participants of a group are not randomly assigned. This type of research design is used in field settings where random assignment is either irrelevant or not required. So this is going to be important for you just to know the difference on the exam, because they can give you a situation where they're saying, social worker is conducting some research and the participants have not been randomly assigned. What type of research is this? And you're going to know, okay, they weren't randomly assigned. This is quasi. So this is how this is important for the actual ASWB exam, knowing the difference between these different types of research designs, because they can ask you questions around the different types of research designs. Now, this is in addition to, like I said, the video that I did before on community and macro, but this is just some important terms for you to know in regards to research. So when reading and interpreting experimental research findings, you should be able to identify these things: independent versus dependent variables. So we know that the independent variables are those that are believed to be the causes, and the dependent variables, which are the impacts or the results. And then we have reliability and validity. Reliability is concerned with obtaining the same findings. We want the findings to be reliable repeatedly when conditions are not altered. So we want reliable findings. Okay. Validity focuses on accuracy. So we want reliable findings for reliability, just what it's saying, and then we want accurate findings for validity. Now, there are two types of validity, like I told you earlier: the internal and the external. So, internal validity is the confidence that exists that the independent variable is the cause of the dependent variable, okay, and not any extra factors, okay. So, it is thinking internally that the independent variable is causing the dependent variable, okay. And so, all that means is what you believe, what the research is believing to be the cause, is what's causing the impact, or what's giving you the results that you're giving when you are researching a certain program, or even a certain behavior or anything like that. And then we have measurement error. This is the difference between what assessments indicate and actual constructs. Okay, these errors are often introduced when collecting data. So that's another definition or term for you to know for the exam. And I would also advise you to go and look up examples of each of these. What are examples of independent variables and dependent variables, so that you can have more clarity on these terms, because they are asking questions around your knowledge with these terms. Now, here's a cool little image that I found that's going to transition us into the second half of this presentation. And this is just basically helping you to distinguish research from evaluation. So on the research side, we're seeking to generate new knowledge, where on the evaluation side, we are getting information for decision making. The research side, of course, we're researcher focused. On evaluation side, we're stakeholder focused. On the research side, we focus on the hypothesis. On the evaluation side, we focus on key questions. Okay? On the research side, we make research recommendations. But on the evaluation side, we make recommendations based on the key questions. Okay? So, not key questions and hypothesis are two different things. Okay, hypothesis is just educated guesses, which is different from key questions that we have about a program. Okay, and then research, on the research side, we publish our results, and on the evaluation side, because it's stakeholder focused, we report our results to the stakeholders. So these are some differences between research and evaluation, which is going to lead us into the evaluation part of this presentation. So this is just a recap again from the community and macro as well. This is just the 6 steps for program evaluation. We're not going to get into it too much into this video. We're going to be talking about other things, but just a recap in case you need to know what the 6 steps of program evaluation is. Here they are. First you want to establish and engage your stakeholders. Then you want to explain what the program is about. Then you select the design of the evaluation. Then you start collecting your data after you have the design. Then after you have your data, you want to generate conclusions based off of the data analysis. And then you want to state your findings and provide recommendations from those conclusions based off of that data analysis. So this is the 6 steps in program evaluation. So if you need to, again, write these steps down, definitely pause the video to do so. But you have to know the steps of program evaluation in order to appropriately or accurately answer the questions on the exam. All right, so this is where you may again want to pause and take some notes. These are the types of evaluations, and you can very well see these types of evaluations on the ASWB exam just to test your knowledge to see if you know the different types of evaluation. Now, main 2 types of evaluation is formative and summative, which formative um, it examines the process of delivering services, whereas the summative, think about the sum of it, it examines the outcome. So one is examining the process while we're delivering services and while we're forming it, and the other one is the sum of it where you examine the outcomes. That's how I remember it. So informative, of course, it's an ongoing process that allows for feedback to be implemented during service delivery. That's important. It also allows social workers to make changes as needed to help achieve program goals. So if you are um, doing this evaluation during the delivery of services, you are able to make changes as needed to help you achieve the program goals. So a needs assessment can be viewed as one type of formative evaluation. Now, summative, it occurs at the end because, again, we're examining the outcomes, and it provides an overall description of their effectiveness. It examines the outcomes to determine whether objectives were met. It enables decisions to be made regarding future service directions that cannot be made during implementation. So that is why it's summative. And impact evaluations and cost benefit analysis, which we'll talk a little bit more about, are types of summative evaluation. So we have a needs assessment is more formative, and impact evaluation and cost benefit analysis are types of summative um, evaluations. And then we have process evaluation. This is an assessment of how the program is being implemented and whether it is being implemented as originally planned. There are ethical standards that must be followed when evaluating practice. So, from the Code of Ethics, here's some of the guidelines. You are obtaining voluntary and written informed consent from clients when appropriate without any implied or actual deprivation or penalty for refusal to participate, without undue inducement to participate, and with due regard for participants' well being, privacy, and dignity. This is from the Code of Ethics. Informing clients of their right to withdraw from the evaluation and research at any time without penalty. The clients need to know that they do not have to stay in the research project if they become uncomfortable or if they just want to opt out. They can do that at any time for any reason. Ensuring clients and evaluations have access to appropriate supportive services, and avoiding conflicts of interest and dual relationships with those being evaluated. These are some of the ethical practices that we need to be guided by when we are evaluating in practice. Now let's talk a little bit more about program evaluation and the different types. So program evaluation is the systematic assessment of the processes and or outcomes of a program with the intent of furthering its development and improvement. That is what program evaluation are. There are many types of program evaluation, including but not limited to the following. So these are the 3 basics: cost benefit analysis, cost effectiveness analysis, and outcomes assessment. Okay, so you can pause and shorthand some of this information so that you can get the gist of what each one of these are, but definitely knowing what cost benefit analysis is, what cost effectiveness analysis is, and outcome assessment is also going to be very beneficial to you. A cost benefit analysis determines the financial cost of operating a program as compared with the fiscal benefits of its outcomes. And we're going to get into this a little bit more. I'm going to try to simplify this so that you can have a visual and see exactly what this looks like in actual practice. So just know that it is basically weighing the costs against the benefits. Okay, program decisions can be made to eliminate or modify the program by reducing expenditures based upon the findings of a cost benefit analysis. Now, the cost effectiveness analysis, and think about it, these words are just kind of meaning exactly what they're saying. What are the costs versus the benefits? We're analyzing what are the costs versus the benefits. And in cost effectiveness, we're analyzing what's the cost versus the effectiveness. So a cost effectiveness analysis is similar to a cost benefit analysis, but distinct. It considers the benefits that are not measured in monetary terms. So that's why it's not benefit, it's effectiveness, because it's not measured in monetary terms. That is the key here, such as the illnesses that were prevented by this program or the lives that were saved by this drug or this medication, whatever it is we're evaluating. It does not produce a cost benefit ratio, but may focus on the most financially efficient way to achieve a defined outcome or cost by producing a specific non-monetary outcome. So when you think about cost effectiveness, think about non-monetary. Cost benefit, that is more on the monetary side. And then there's an outcomes assessment. It is the process of determining whether a program has achieved its intended goals. Okay, so we're assessing the outcome of the program, exactly what it's saying, y'all. It involves collecting evidence through assessment, analyzing the data, and then using the findings to make programmatic changes if needed. Okay, so again, they are simply just defining what they say they are. You're assessing outcomes, you're analyzing the effectiveness versus the cost, or you're analyzing the benefit versus the cost. Again, we're going to get a little bit more into it. All right, so cost benefit analysis quantifies program benefits in monetary terms. Again, remember I told you, remember that word monetary, and assesses whether they exceed program costs. So we're trying to see whether the benefits are in excess to the cost of the program. So we're trying to see if the cost is going to outweigh the benefits or vice versa. Here are the steps to cost benefit analysis. I'm honestly not sure if you need to know the steps to cost benefit analysis on the exam. I just put it here just for reference, but I haven't seen any questions requiring you to know the steps. But again, for reference, if you want to know it. But also, here's an example. It's good to always have an example so that when you see certain scenarios on the exam, you are able to identify, okay, hey, this is an example of cost benefit analysis. So an example would be an agency decides to conduct a CBA, which is a cost benefit analysis of hiring 5 new social workers. So the cost to do this is $100,000, but the benefits that they're going to receive back is going to be worth $150,000. So the company can generate an extra $50,000 each year. So they should go through with the decision to hire 5 new social workers because the benefits outweigh the costs. Okay. Cost effectiveness analysis. This considers the benefits, again, that are not measured in monetary value, such as illness prevention and or lives saved. It compares the cost of an intervention to its effectiveness measured in natural health units. So the cost is a monetary unit. The consequences is a natural unit, such as years of life saved or cases, that was prevented based off of this program or this drug. Okay, so the basic steps to cost effectiveness analysis is you want to measure the outcome, calculate the cost, and then divide the cost by the outcome for each activity. That's how you see if it was more cost effective. So an example of that would include the cost per case of disease prevented or the cost per death averted. So if you implemented some type of prevention program, what was the cost per case that prevented this disease? How many diseases were spared? How many people were spared of this disease because of this prevention program? Or how many deaths were averted because of this prevention program? Okay. So, however, if the net costs are negative, which means a more effective intervention is less costly, the results are reported as negative cost savings. So, if there's a more effective intervention out there that is costing less than the one that you did, then we know that that's going to be a net cost savings. And of course, we don't, we want to be on the positive side. So just think about that again in not monetary value, but think of it in natural health units, like how many lives are being saved, how effective was it for the people that it was intended for. And I constantly like to think of prevention programs, whether it be pregnancy, teen pregnancy prevention, um, AIDS awareness, these type of prevention programs. How many lives have been saved by this program? How many cases of diseases have the cases of diseases went down in this area since we started this prevention program? Things like that, or how you're going to measure the cost effectiveness. So outcomes assessment. This tells the social worker whether or not a program or client have reached their intended treatment goals. Okay, so the steps to an outcome assessment is, first you can compare the actual outcomes with your expected outcomes. So what did we put in the treatment goals? Or, if it's a program, what did we put in the program goals? And identify any gaps or discrepancies or any surprises that happened. Compare them with what we actually ended up with. That's the first thing. Second, you can explore the reasons and the factors behind the outcomes. Like, what are the reasons why we have these we ended up with these outcomes? What worked well? What did not work well? Then after that, you can seek feedback and input from your clients, colleagues, and stakeholders, and listen to their perspectives and experiences. And then fourth, you can apply your learning to your current and future practice and make changes or adjustments as needed. Now, again, I would say the most important thing, information in this area, is just especially just knowing what an outcome assessment is, what an example of that is, what that looks like, and just knowing that this is what you're going to do when you are trying to see whether or not your program has reached its goal. The goals that you set at the initial, in the beginning, the program goals, or your client, whatever that treatment goals is, whenever you're evaluating to see if those outcomes were successful or not. That is an outcome assessment. So I'm not sure about if you need to know the steps, but I put them there just because. Now let's talk about the effects of program evaluation findings on services. One of the most significant benefits that a program evaluation communicates is the need to make service improvements. So, some examples of improvements that may need to be made may include eliminating services that do not achieve program outcomes, adding services that are better designed to achieve outcomes, acquiring more adequate resources to support effective services, targeting a different group of participants to receive the services. Evaluation findings should be viewed and communicated as an opportunity to make programs better. That is the point of us evaluating our programs. An action plan aimed at improvement should be developed based on the evaluation results and communicated widely to the stakeholders. Remember that evaluation is primarily about the stakeholders. Another term to be familiar with is evidence-based practice, which is where the social work practice combines research, knowledge, professional and clinical expertise, social work values, and client preferences and circumstances. It is a dynamic and fluid process whereby social workers seek, interpret, use, and evaluate the best available information in an effort to make best practice decisions. Okay, so it also involves the process of gathering and synthesizing scientific evidence from various sources and translating it into applied practice. So we are using evidence-based resources, or findings, like for instance CBT. There's evidence that CBT works for certain diagnoses like depression, things like that, or is there's evidence practice about DBT for borderline personality disorder. Those are examples of evidence-based practice. You're basically using these practices based off of their track records. All right, so here's just some recall practice questions for you to have just for an example of, the type of question you could possibly see. A social worker proposes a pilot program for youth with substance use problems in order to determine whether an intervention, which has been highly effective with adults, has similar results with children. The social worker wants to examine whether outcomes can be generalized to younger age groups before offering the service to all minors in the agency. The pilot program aims to address concerns about which one? Is it A, measurement error, B, internal validity, C, reliability, and D, external validity? Take a minute to think about what each one of these terms mean, which we have discussed previously in the program, and just think about what's going on in the scenario. You're proposing this pilot program for youth with substance use, okay? And you're trying to determine whether this intervention that has been highly effective for adults is going to also work with children, okay? So you want to see if the outcomes can be generalized from the older adults to the younger adults. What is that called? If you answer D, you are correct. External validity is the extent to which the same results will be produced if the context or population is altered. So we're going from an adult population to a younger population. It determines to what extent an intervention can be generalized. So can we generalize the same intervention that we use for adults to the children's population? Is basically what external validity is. And another basic practice question: in conducting an evaluation of an innovative program, the most important responsibility of the evaluator is to A, conduct a valid evaluation, B, consider the generalizability of any positive findings, B, be sure that the most needy individuals get into the program, or D, be sure that the evaluation does not harm the participants. We're looking for the most important responsibility of the evaluator when we are trying to conduct an evaluation. And of course, you want to look at putting these in order of priority and level of importance because they're asking you what is the most important. So some of these or all of these could be correct, but which one would be the most important thing that the evaluator, the most important responsibility of the evaluator? And again, if you answer D, you are correct. We want to be sure that the evaluation does not harm the participants. This concludes the presentation. I hope that this was helpful to you. If it was, go ahead on and give me a thumbs up, like the video. You can put any questions or comments you have in the comment section below. Again, I appreciate your support. I appreciate you being here. If you are not subscribed to the channel, you can subscribe. If you would like more detailed information or, just kind of videos like this, I do have an online course where these things are taught more in detail, and you're also getting a lot of practice questions to go along with that. So you can look that up on my website that is listed here, www.savvysocialworkerexamprep.com, or you can send me an email if you have any questions about any services. All services are virtual and online. So feel free to visit my website. Again, thank you for being here, and let's continue to get those passes the Savvy way.